Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another mildly interesting video. Riddle me this toy. You can release all of the One Piece stuff that you want internationally and on theaters in the big screen, but if you want the finale to a reboot to one of the classic shows that introduced the people in the West to anime in the early 90s, that's too much to ask?
At long last, it is finished.
Finally, I can say that I'm a Moonie. Or a lunatic. At this point, I don't really know.
Sailor Moon Cosmos marks the end of the Sailor Moon reboot, and boy howdy, what a journey that has been. The first two seasons were some of the most excruciating, annoying television that I've ever seen, which led me to believe they fired everyone who worked in those first two seasons and replaced everyone, because Season 3 was such a massive step up in quality, nuanced protagonist views leading into a morally gray area that the show hadn't really explored before, combined with a much smoother and cleaner animation, while also realizing that maybe a show about schoolgirls shouting random stuff at aliens shouldn't take itself so seriously. So naturally, they followed this up with a two-part movie series, which took a while before it was released internationally through Emperor Netflix.
Now, considering that Cosmos is the finale to the Sailor Moon reboot, I was expecting a bit more of a big, glamorous ending, like, say, a worldwide theatrical release, or even a limited theatrical release, because that could have given fans all over the world a chance to be able to meet together and watch the finale of one of their favorite stories of all time, maybe even their favorite story of all time. Plus, Avengers did that with Endgame, and they made $3 billion in the box office, so surely Toei could get a piece of that pie. But instead, they only did theatrical releases in Japan, and then released the whole thing internationally via Netflix. Great job!
And Cosmos really feels like the endgame, considering that this is the final part of the reboot. But it went so much further than I expected it to, even just from the first 20 minutes, where we get a real taste of how destructive the villain is, and how personal the stakes have become now. It was basically one huge I was not expecting this to happen 20 minutes in moment, and it only kept going for that whole part. The first part just feels like us reeling from those 20 minutes, while the villain just keeps destroying our protagonist with a punch after punch. The stakes and the level of what we are dealing with are communicated so loudly and so clearly that when things kick into full gear in part 2, we go straight into the action. The villains in this two-part movie are way more menacing. Before we even have time to fully settle into this new period of the piece, after the events of Eternal, the villain has struck so hard that it immediately captures our attention. We are quite literally given no time to rest and consider what is going on, because the villains just keep firing blow after blow to our protagonist in such a shocking manner that I can't believe this was marketed towards kids, but screw it, it's time to let them suffer too. Now, the story is definitely way stronger thanks to Sailor Galaxia and her strong actions, with an understandable motivation behind all of that, even if it does come off as cheesy. But from the bigger and the grander scale of Cosmos to the shocking 20-minute mark, the story is basically the strongest that we have seen. But it's not told in an efficient manner. The same problem that plagued the previous entries is still here in full force. The excess of voiceover exposition and dialogue. Quite frequently we get voiceovers where characters say what they are feeling despite us already knowing it, because the visuals have already shown us everything.
Of course there's nothing here yet.
I'll write you letters. I'll call you all the time.
What are they like? Wait, what are they like? What's happening to me? I can't remember anything. That slightly low voice, it's lingering in my ears. Those eyes seem to draw me in. They're forcing me to remember. They resemble Amo-chan's.
She's attacking Sailor Guardians across the galaxy. Sadly, we think her goal is to become the most powerful Sailor Guardian.
Sailor Guardians across the galaxy? You mean there are other Sailor Guardians out there?
Oh my god, we get it!
Another problem is that for a while, we don't know exactly where the story is going. At first, we think it's to defeat Sailor Galaxia until we suddenly meet 3 new Sailor Guardians, and it is interesting. It builds intrigue because we wonder where did they come from, what do they want, but at this point we already know that they're the good guys, even as Uranus and Neptune say they're enemies, because it's pretty easy to see that coming. We will get into this later. The soundtrack was overall forgettable, although I clearly remember it did a good job of elevating the scenes that it was used in, even if it did feel a bit overused. But what was definitely not forgettable were the openings. These openings were covers of the openings from Sailor Moon Classic from the 90s, used for both parts of the movies, both Moonlight Densetsu and Sailor Star Song. It was definitely a nice gesture towards the older fans of the shows, who I believe are 40 to 50 year olds. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of the songs, and I feel like I need to double check my death certificates.
I always keep extra death certificates in hand, just in case the fans don't just murder me, but also burn down the house.
The general gist of the story is that Sailor Galaxia wants to do world domination because that's what every villain wants, but this time it's galaxy domination. That's why we call her Sailor Galaxia. And at the same time, 3 people calling themselves Sailor Guardians are on Earth Earth looking for their princess, and they're trying to lure her out using songs, hoping that the princess comes to them, so they start a boy band by doing so. And at the same time, a little girl named Chibi Chibi descends from the sky, bringing bad news about the future. So you basically have 3 different stories interconnected into one, much like Black Mirror's White Christmas or Pulp Fiction, I don't know.
You can probably tell that a lot happens in these movies, and the stories raise overall questions about the world of Sailor Moon, like, why are there other Sailor Guardians? Are they also from Earth? Actually, where did they all come from? Why is the big bad of the movies a Sailor Guardian, and what turned her into the bad side? And is she also from Earth? Are any of these Sailor Guardians from Earth in the galaxy? And from like another part of the universe? Where did they all come from? A lot of the questions are asked about the world building, and that's what the movies mostly deal with.
We go interstellar beyond Earth and explore life and the Sailor Guardians within the Milky Way galaxy, not too dissimilar from Trishan Liu's 3-Body Problem trilogy, and I feel like this is a very fitting way to close the reboot. We go above and beyond the scope of anything we had explored before, not just with the villains and their actions, but the world itself too. And I would have loved to see more of this interesting world and the alien planets and the civilizations. And I'm thinking that if Toei decides to touch on Sailor Moon again, because it is a massive cash cow at this point, an anthology spin-off series exploring the different alien civilizations and Sailor Guardians of the Milky Way would be a great show. We really only go into the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which thus proves the scientists wrong, because it turns out the middle of the Milky Way is not a supermassive black hole, it's a cauldron of sorts.
That's the kind of stuff you only see at Costco.
Now, I wouldn't call this a spoiler because it doesn't really change anything big, plot-wise or character-wise, but another part of this world building is how they reveal that every single villain is connected to the same endgame villain, the one that we fight in Cosmos. And I thought that was fairly nice, even if it did come out a bit out of nowhere. But as far as I can remember, there wasn't really anything to suggest that the previous villains were all connected into one, and considering that the story was already done, as they're just straight up adapting the manga, which finished in the late 90s, we could have definitely put in some foreshadowing, but it's still alright. Now, admittedly, my memory of Sailor Moon Crystal is kind of fuzzy, so I do not really remember the details of the foreshadowing, if there was any foreshadowing at all that all of the villains were connected into one, but I think it was still a nice touch. So all in all, this finale to the Sailor Moon reboot does a great job of expanding the scope of the world and the story, from the first 20 minutes to us going interstellar and beyond. The stakes are higher yet more personal at the same time, it delves into even darker territory with some pretty good cosmic horror aspects, and it ends in the most galactic and explosive way possible for a franchise like this. But it still fell into the same pitfall as the previous entries did, with the excess of voiceover exposition, and it does take a while before we truly understand where the story is headed because of all of those new aspects of the world and the story that they throw in here. But in my opinion, they do a pretty good job of wrapping up everything and connecting all of these dots into one through line by the time the second part rolls in. And once they get that ball formed and rolling, it just doesn't stop rolling until the very end of part 2.
So overall, as movies, they're pretty okay. As finales, they're pretty great. The only thing that this franchise could have really used is an official crossover with the 3-Body Problem trilogy. And I know that these two are completely different stories, but I just absolutely love the cosmic horror in the two of them.